Okay, recording. So thank you all for coming to virtual class today. Just some quick housekeeping before we launch into our guest speaker. Today is going to be a shortened class. Thank you guys for coming. I know we made this optional, so appreciate you guys taking the time out of the storm to come hear Lyndsey speak. After Lyndsey's going to give a short informal presentation and take some questions from you guys about her experience and about this idea of documenting communities, documenting trauma, documenting perhaps some difficult environmental justice issues. And then we want to make sure that you guys are prepared for some of the assignments that are due after fall break, because we are not meeting next class for fall break. You don't need to come to class. And after that, your draft mid-semester outline is due. And we're going to start connecting you with people for oral history collection. It's just things are going to launch. So I want to make sure everyone's prepared for all of that before we take 2 weeks off from each other. Again, going to go into all those details afterwards, but any questions about the plan for today? No, cool beans. I would love it if we could quickly do some intros. I know we do this every time we have a person, but really like Lyndsey is awesome. And you guys need to meet her. Like, oh my gosh. So if we could go around the Zoom room and quickly introduce ourselves, like name, school year, pronouns. We can do a brief, why'd you join the class? And like, I don't know, a sentence. You don't need to take too long. First person on my screen is Victoria.
Hi. So sorry, that is the first time I've spoken today. Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm a sophomore. I'm majoring in International Comparative Studies and Spanish. And I am taking this class because I did some oral history collection in my Envisioning Human Rights focus cluster when I was a freshman, and I loved the opportunity to hear other people's stories and to be trusted with other people's stories. I'm a storyteller by heart, so I'm very excited to be able to do that with this awesome group of people.
Awesome. Next I have Betsy.
Hi, Lyndsey. It's good to see you. I'm Betsy Albright, faculty at the Nicholas School. I think we've met a couple of times, and I'm one of the co-leads of the Past Connections project. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Christina. I know you're eating. We can.
Sorry. Sorry, I just took a bite of my grilled cheese. My name is Christina. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior. I'm majoring in environmental science with a minor in psychology. Sorry. And I was interested in taking this class because I'm interested in exploring environmental justice issues. And I also think storytelling is a really important and valuable way for people to learn about issues. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Amina.
Hi, Lyndsey. I'm Amina Hester. I'm a senior at UNC Chapel Hill, studying public policy and environmental justice. And I got involved with this project mainly through Cameron after attending a conference on environmental justice last semester and just being interested in exploring environmental justice through different disciplines. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Ryan.
Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm in the Nicholas School. I'm in one of Betsy's classes, aside from this. I'm interested in learning how to meaningfully engage with communities. And I think oral history is a great way to do that. And so I'm looking forward to learning how to conduct oral histories.
Magna.
Hi, Lyndsey. I'm Magna. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a sophomore undergrad studying international comparative studies and environmental policy. I joined this class because I'm pretty new to the EJ movement, and I just wanted to learn more about the amazing communities that have been a part of it and how I can help.
Megan.
Hello, I'm Megan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a sophomore undergrad. And I'm involved with this project because I'm a history major, but I'm really new to collecting oral histories and the environmental justice movement, and I'm really interested in learning more about it.
Ariel.
Hi, I'm Ariel. I'm a junior undergrad majoring in environmental science with a minor in inequality studies, which is technically a history minor. And I joined this project. Oh, she, her pronouns. I joined this project because I hope to make environmental justice the focus of my career after graduation. Not sure what that looks like right now, but hopefully I will someday.
Danny.
Hey, Lyndsey, thanks for coming to talk to us today. I'm Danny. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a second year Master's of Public Policy student. My role in this project is evaluating to sort of make a case study out of it. And the reason why I wanted to do it is because I'm just passionate about environmental justice and wanting to learn more about ethical community engagement around it.
Tasha.
Hey, Lyndsey, it's nice to meet you. My name is Tasha. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a junior at Duke studying African-American history and documentary studies. I'm involved in this project because I've always been passionate about racial justice and equity. And I think storytelling is one of the necessary meanings for mediums for change. And but I have yet to intersect with environmental justice in depth, in an in-depth way. So I decided to take this class and see what it's all about.
Sophia.
Hi, Lyndsey. My name is Sophia. I'm a senior. I use she, her pronouns. I'm doing a program too, focused on social movements and social justice. And I'm interested in this work because I love oral histories. I think they're really cool, and I think they're a really unique way to learn about a community and sharing those stories. So yeah.
And Amanda.
Hi, I'm a second year Master of Public Policy student. She, her pronouns. I am interested in civil and human rights of any kind, but also my background's in journalism. So storytelling is my main career passion. And I really want to get into specifically justice stories and want to make sure that I'm telling them in the right way. So I figured learning this side or this format of storytelling was a good thing to experience.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves, for humoring me on that one. I think the most interesting bit is Lyndsey you worked at Duke for a minute in the DeWitt Wallace Center for Media and Democracy. I think that's how we got most fully connected. And I think you were really just working with journalism students. We have a lot of students from a bunch of different
it's cool.
disciplines interested in this type of work. So I perhaps that was an opportunity to show you how impactful the work you're doing is and how excited people are to be engaging in similar topics as you outside of journalism, Lyndsey, a little bump up for you. So with that said, if you wanted to perhaps introduce yourself, we can just get launched. I know you didn't have a presentation or anything if you wanted to start talking.
Yeah. And well, I'll introduce myself first and then I'll give you the bullet points of what I'm gonna word vomit about for the next 20 minutes. I'm Lyndsey Gilpin, obviously. I use she, her pronouns. I am in Louisville, Kentucky. I was in Durham for a couple of years, which is where Cameron and I met. I edited journalism students work, which was really fun. I absolutely loved Durham. My now husband, was in a master's program, public policy, international development policy program there, and it was only a year long, and it was during the pandemic, so we never really got to make it was there's so much going on in that area and in North Carolina in general, and we kind of just ended up moving back to Louisville, which is my hometown, because we were where do we go? And he was done with school and we were trying to figure out what to do. But I just miss Durham every day. So, and North Carolina in general. So it's a big piece of my heart. So it's really cool to be able to talk to you. And I adore Cameron. For somehow I'm lucky enough to be able to work with her in many different capacities. And she's inspired a lot of like the environmental justice work that Southerly is doing. So I'm incredibly grateful. She would never tell you that herself, but she has been a huge part of Southerly's journey. So I just wanted to say that because she's amazing. And I'm just super excited to be able to share a space with her again. So I'll talk about a little bit about Southerly, how Southerly got started, like kind of our evolution, because we've gone through a lot of changes, because as you probably know, the environment's changing very fast, media is changing very fast. Just that's the dogs. Hold on one second. Stop. Quit. All right, my bad. No one's home, so I have to like corral everybody. And everything's changing quickly, and we've been trying to figure out like where Southerly fits in the media ecosystem here. There's more environmental justice focused reporting in general, and in the South especially. So I'll talk a little about that, and then kind of the work we're doing now. And if you have a question, like throw it in the chat. We can have like lots of time for questions, but if you want to stop me or just like do your little hand raisey thing on Zoom or whatever, like, and Cameron, if you want to pause me and tell me to explain something more or whatever, like totally happy to do that. I want this to be a conversation because I know it sucks to have someone like talking at you for like 20 minutes. So yeah, I guess I'll just kind of give you the basic how Southerly started. I was in Colorado at High Country News, which is a magazine. It's been around for 50 years. In rural Western Colorado, covers the American West in 2016, and was doing a lot of investigative journalism out there, not really on kind of on like some climate stuff, some water stuff, but also I did a big investigation of sexual harassment in the National Park Service, kind of right before the Me Too movement started. So I was kind of like dead set on becoming an investigative journalist. And I was like, this is where like I need to be out west because I like love the environment. And it's really important for me to be out in California or Colorado, or like that's where all the jobs are and where everybody's paying attention to. And, obviously that was during the presidential election. And, the South and Appalachia in particular were sort of being blanketed as like one giant place that's to be blamed for Trump and for a million other things, as it usually is, that no one cares about what's happening, that people don't know what's going on with climate change. People don't know how to, are backwards or not smart enough, or like all of the typical stereotypes, right, that you hear. And that's not anything new, right? Like we see that all the time when it comes to hurricanes. People come in when there's a storm, leave after it's done, when there's an oil spill in the Gulf, when there's a chemical spill, like any kind of like pollution event or anything that is surrounding environmental justice in general, right, is just kind of like, okay, we'll pay attention to when it's happening and leave after it's done, and not really stick around to see how communities are affected for months and years. So I was sort of like having this moment back then where I was like, well, it helped that I got rejected from a job. So I was like, oh God, like what am I supposed to do? But I moved home to Louisville, and I was like, okay, I'll freelance. Like I had enough connections around that time to start freelancing. I was like, I'll just focus on environmental issues in the South. And environmental justice was like really like the human stories of environmental issues was sort of like where I always gravitated. Like, how is that affecting people? Not necessarily like the kind of technical sciencey stuff that was happening and also important. And I started Southerly as a newsletter, and I was like, I'll just see if other people are into this, like if they want more stories. Because around that time, there were some like growing Southern publications, Scalawag, Bitter Southerner, Oxford American had been around for a long time. But a lot of them were like more literary, long form, like not solely focused on the environment. So I just started curating like news that I was seeing and writing every week. And somehow it kept growing and people started paying attention to it. I think because I was at that point pretty active on Twitter, like talking to a lot of people, calling people out when they were assholes about the South, like just generally like being a voice of like kind of like an authoritative voice on like what journalism in the South should look like, and trying to create a space for myself in that. And in doing that, we somehow got written up in the New York Times, and that's sort of like, it was like an op-ed section with a bunch of Southern publications. And so it got a lot more attention, like people even out of the region were starting to pay attention and donating to, like, we had a Patreon campaign to start, like, I basically started saving up to start publication. Like, no idea. I went to journalism school. No one ever told me how to do that. So it was kind of crazy to even think that it was possible. But we got a small grant for like $5,000 in addition to like a little bit of the money that was kind of like helping keep us afloat, and just like the time I was spending on it. And we did a series of stories in Alabama, rural Alabama, about sewage infrastructure and how it was failing in Lowndes County, and how that was creating public health issues, specifically because it was raining more flooding, climate change, making it worse, the same old spiel, but like, it just wasn't being written about a lot. So I freelanced a couple stories about it. And then we did a series and a video, with the Montgomery Advertiser, which was a Gannett publication. And, those published online. There was like a 4-part series, and I was like, okay, well, I guess this is a publication now. I had a friend build the website, for free. And then we held an event in Lowndes County where we had a panel of people from the health department, Catherine Flowers, who is now very famous. very famous.
She's technically a part of this project. The students have gotten to connect with her a little bit the last couple.
Yeah. So like Catherine was like still very like, that was not that long ago, but like she was very big in her community, but like she was just like, she hadn't like talked to the president yet or anything like that, so it was really cool because I spent a lot of time with her, and we kind of built a relationship around that and learned a lot about environmental justice in Alabama from her. And so she was on the panel, a couple other people, and the idea was that like, okay, Southerly is really small, so how can we get this in front of more people? And so the partnership with the paper made that possible because it was printed and it was online. And we had this event to actually reach the people that it was about. So we were like, okay, let's get them in a room, start talking about all these issues. And like, it was not perfect. It was like kind of a town hall kind of thing where everyone was like, kind of going off on tangents. And like, I didn't know how to run an event. So it was like, but it was a really cool panel, and there were like 40 people there. And when that happened, I sort of realized like, all right, this is the kind of journalism I want to do, like the journalism that's for people, not about them, and journalism that actually reaches where it needs to be, right? Like we're not just writing big, long investigations that no one ever sees or no one ever reads because they don't have time because they work 3 jobs and like can't read a big, long investigation or pay for access to the New York Times or like all of these things. So anyway, just like fast forward a couple years, published a few stories here and there for a while, kind of got a little more attention, was really trying to find like what we were focusing on, but it was often about environmental justice issues, just because like, as you probably know, like, of course, that comes up over and over again when you're talking about pollution, when you're talking about climate change, like disasters, anything like that. And so by the time the pandemic hit, we were kind of getting we had a little more funding. We were getting kind of like a more regular publishing schedule. And another like big moment I had was in January 2020, so right before the pandemic, we had an event in Robeson County, North Carolina, where we partnered with a Spanish language news outlet in Enlace Latino NC, which you might know of, based in Raleigh. And we had translators there who were like live translating the event. And then we had a bunch of journalists come and talk about housing, hurricane recovery from Florence, which obviously was like 2 years before, but was still impacting people. And then a few other, topic like jobs, things like that. Well, during that meeting, over and over again, like people just wanted to talk about hurricane recovery. It was a lot of indigenous, like Lumbee citizens. It was a lot of Latinx folks. And then it was just kind of a random group of like elders, young people, like a bunch of people. And like over and over again, like they had binders of stuff being like, my house still has mold in it. What do I do? Like, how do I call FEMA? Why is no one paying attention to this? Like, it's been 2 years. I'm still out of my home. And I remember someone saying to me, actually it was Lisa Sorg. I don't know if you all know her work at NC Policy Watch. She was like, it's a shame we can't just do things like they used to, where like have things that like people could like cut out of the paper and like put on their fridge. where like the things you need to know, like, here's the numbers you need to call if you're, in an emergency or whatever. And she was like, you don't have that anymore. And people really need like that basic info. And like those two kind of things and that event really made me, especially when the pandemic started and we were kind of trying to figure out like, what do we do? Like everything's virtual now. What do we do? It became we kind of committed even more deeply to the idea that like to document environmental injustice, like we have to prioritize the like access part and the information part as much as like the beautiful storytelling part, right? And so that sort of started us on this kind of journey of partnering more directly with community organizations and news outlets. So we were working with like public radio, legacy newspapers, national newspapers, like trying to get it out in front of more people, get it in print or on radio, but also working directly with organizations like libraries and NAACP chapters, and then eventually like environmental justice organizations, which is what we do more often now. And so during all this time, I had a fellowship through Stanford University, the JSK Community Impact Fellowship. Was like incredibly fortunate to be able to like, not only did that like pay my salary for 2 years, but like I was able to do my own work and learn from a group of people who are doing this all over the country. So people who are already like focused on community powered journalism, like what happens when you actually give people the tools they need to tell their own stories or to understand like how journalism works better so that they can like have agency over that. And so through that process, the last couple of years, I've just really kind of, the more I become disillusioned with like how journalism as a whole works, the more like committed it's become to this idea of like, what is Southerly for? Like, who are we trying to reach and how are we getting to them? And like, how do you actually make an impact on something as overwhelming and difficult as environmental justice? Like how there's so many stories and ways you can go, especially as a regional publication. So, we could pick any number of places where something's happening. So we focused on a few areas. We had a lot of resources, obviously in North Carolina, because I was there. We focused on Louisiana, where when Hurricane Laura hit, we had some folks in New Orleans and were able to like really kind of build some solid relationships there. And then in Kentucky, in Eastern Kentucky in particular, where my family was from, and I have a lot of connections there. So we kind of like, we're doing all these other things, but we're trying to focus on like building relationships in those places. So we did a few different like one-off projects where like we made a newsletter during COVID for Northampton and Halifax counties. This was a part of my fellowship project where like we distributed it through people, like they were at a meeting in their cars in a parking lot. Remember when that was happening? And so we were passing on all these things like information. It had a QR code. They could go online and like look at stories about solar or COVID or like all these things. So just like trying to experiment with what's the best way to meet people where they're at, and not only like listen to them and hear their stories, but also like get them information that they need without making them like go out of their way to get it. So it's just been a huge kind of like evolution in like committing more and more to the idea that yes, there's more journalism, there's more environmental journalism, there's more people telling environmental justice stories and like taking it more seriously, but it's often still not reaching the people it needs to reach. So it doesn't really matter how many times you write about it if no one who's actually experiencing that like has agency over their own story and can kind of see it and do something with it, right? So how do you empower people with that information? Not just to be like, here is, here's a story, do what you want with it, but like, where do you take that next? So I've learned a lot from a bunch of other publications, Documenters and City Bureau in Chicago, Canopy, which is in Atlanta, LEAD, LEDE, New Orleans, which trains youth, LGBTQ youth and BIPOC youth to do documentaries. And there's a couple other ones, Outlier in Detroit. So there's all these models, right, of like, let's make journalism actually serve the people it was meant to serve. And I think that is especially true with environmental justice reporting, because most often the people that are the most affected really never get to tell their stories. And another kind of like through line through all of this is, and I think this really ties into where with your oral history class, is that, you know, oftentimes when we talk about pollution or climate change, you know, people don't have the tools and the language to, or the studies or the research to back up what they're going through. And so using their lived experience as valid data, like that, you know, if someone says, everyone in my family for the past 5 generations has had breast cancer, and there's this coal ash plant or whatever here, and we're like trying to understand why, like, why is that happening? But they don't have the money to get Duke to come out and do a study. Like, what can we do as journalists to help tell their stories and use that as credible information, and like try to figure out, like, how do we put that with statistics or like with research that we already know of in other places, so that we could at least make people feel more valid, if nothing else, in what they're experiencing. Because often, you know, by design, the communities that are facing the effects of climate change and environmental injustice are made to feel isolated, right? Like everyone, the industry, the government, like everyone wants them to feel isolated so that they don't, you know, like they can't build power. And so trying to connect people regionally across state lines, across towns, that sort of thing, and also like get their stories out there, has been a really important way to start to build that power, right? If people know that somebody's taking their story seriously, then, and obviously, you know, you fact check it and you vet it and all of those things that you probably can go through when you're learning like the tools of journalism, but making sure that that is a priority. And so through all of this learning, what Southerly does now is we have a few main programs. So instead of like taking pitches all the time now, like we still do some stories, like Cameron just did a series for us earlier this year. But all of the stories that we do have some component of community engagement. So we host a listening session before the story is done so that we can hear from community members or leaders, like, okay, what are you hearing? What's important to you? Where are you getting your media? What would be useful? What has not been said before? Like a lot of listening and a lot of empathy for what they're saying. Like, how do we take what they're saying and like make something that's useful for them? So we've done the brochures like we did. Did you show them that, camera?
Did I show you all the brochures? No.
Hold on.
We made some brochures.
Actually,
that's my bad. Really quick, I mean, you had a question though. Did you want to jump on that really quick?
I'm sorry. I realized that it was probably like distracting to raise my hand, and I was typing it in the chat. But Lyndsey, I wanted to get your take on what your experience with like popular epidemiology is, or has been in your pieces, where like people have, you know, people in the community have more knowledge of the pollution that they're facing, or its effects on the body, or, you know, certain diseases that have manifested as a result of pollution, and like how that's been received by non-community members or maybe politicians, policymakers. Has it been legitimized, or is it just something that goes by the wayside?
It's a good question. Like, I think it's still such a, you know, like a traditional journalism, newspapers, like big national outlets, like they're not going to take a story when you're like, hey, people are saying they have cancer because of this thing and can you take it seriously, right? Like it takes a lot to like give it a platform. So I don't know that I've like seen real changes, but I do see like on the policy level or like the way people are looking at it. But I have seen like shifts in how seriously people take like residents of these places when that's happening. So for instance, the reason we did this North Carolina brochure was because Sherry White Williamson, who helped us design it, she saw a brochure that we had done a couple of months before, which I'm trying to find, that was on a landfill in Bristol, Virginia, and Tennessee, which like share the same main road, that had a fire inside and like a chemical reaction. It was leaking all this air pollution, and people were getting sick, and they were like, there's this Facebook group with like thousands of people, and they were like, we don't feel good. Like there's something happening to us, and it's all over the place, and no one was taking them seriously. And so there was a few stories locally, but we did this brochure that the link is in the chat, and we created this guide to like the landfill. We did a listening session. We found out that like a lot of Black residents that were living around the landfill were feeling the worst impacts. A lot of like elderly folks that weren't being asked about what was going on, weren't in the Facebook group to like talk about their experiences. And so we put all the like contaminants that could be in that pollution. We asked researchers like what that was like. We vetted all of that stuff and kind of put all that information out there and their stories to validate like, yeah, I have the same effects that you're saying that this chemical in this air pollution can cause. And like, I don't know if it's directly correlated, and we don't necessarily have to say that's directly correlated. But what happened was we passed out all these brochures. They had a bunch of it took months, but and it was not directly because of what Southerly did necessarily, it was these people, but they eventually got a study, like a little mini study done in their community, and had like a panel of people that were like recommending what to do with this landfill. And the landfill closed like a few days ago, I guess like 2 weeks ago, for good. And like, they're not accepting trash anymore, and they're like trying to get rid of it and close it. They're trying to come up with a plan. And they took the recommendations that this group had been saying, hey, we're feeling sick. Like this is why this is bad. And we need to close this. Like, there's no way to address this unless we close it. And so I think it's the most impact that I've seen is that like locally be like, okay, we have enough people and like cred behind us to like take this pamphlet to our city councilman and be like, yo, like we know what's in the air pollution. Like we know what's coming out of that landfill, or we know what might be coming out that landfill. And so we have questions about it. And so creating that conversation, I think, gives people a little more like power in saying, I think I know what's going on. But I would love to 5 years from now, see if there's like any big impact on that, because, it's still really hard to get people taken seriously. But I think even just like having the documentation, like a record of what's happening online, hopefully one day if someone is doing research, then they can go back and be like, hey, this was said in like 2022 that like this was happening. And I think that's where like oral history and storytelling can like play a role in it. So I don't know if that really didn't answer your question, because it was a good question, but
no, it does. I really appreciate you saying that. Just getting it down on paper or in an article is a way of catapulting that into future studies. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think that it takes, I think with the like community kind of based journalism, where it's like, all right, we are part of our community. Like this is a public service that we are providing. And like, how do we provide that? Well, we believe people when they say that something's happening to them and investigate it, right? Like we could do that. We believe people and we, look into it or ask questions about it. Or we give them the tools to do that themselves, which is like another thing that we're doing through a couple different programs. So we just came up with a fellowship that we're starting next week, that we are training people in their communities to, we picked 7 people, and 2 of them have a little more journalism experience, and 5 of them have like no journalism experience. And they are going to do an information access project around disaster issues in their communities. So we have a couple from Florida, a couple from North Carolina, Kentucky, Jackson, Mississippi, and we are basically training them for 3 months on how to interview, how to get public records, how to edit and write and do a Q&A, and like all these things that kind of seems like, you wouldn't necessarily get that training unless you go to journalism school, but it could be useful in anything, right? Oh my God, my dogs. Jolene, come here. My dog's name is Jolene, if you're a Dolly Parton fan. Come here. So trying to train them so that even if they never do journalism again, they at least have the tools to like ask the right questions or to get to the right people or the documents that they need. And so I feel like that's kind of like a step further of like saying, hey, we're going to tell your story, but actually, how about you tell your story? And it doesn't have to be like an advocacy, like kind of thing, right? It's more of a, let's give you the tools so that you know how to like ethically do these things so that you're taken seriously, if that makes sense.
We have 2 more questions that popped up. I know, Lyndsey.
Yeah, ask me questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm like, my dogs are going crazy.
Sophia and then Amanda.
Yeah, just really quickly, you talked about ways in which you like make sure that like the community is being like listened to when you're like disseminating this information, but kind of like preemptively, like when you're going into these communities that may not be your own, how do you like make sure that these communities feel like loved and cared for and validated and like not feel exploited even like before the like interview process starts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, you know, since I started reporting just in general, like I've always gravitated towards like these environmental justice stories, but like I'm a white woman, right? Like that's not my community most often that I was reporting on. And I think that there are many, you know, there are ways you can do that ethically, if even if it's not your community. Definitely. But kind of the way that like Southerly has evolved, it's trying to find people that are already in those places, already in those communities, are the ones telling those stories. So like a journalist that lives in a certain place and knows it well, or is Indigenous if they're writing about Indigenous communities, or is working very closely. The way we've kind of like connected those things sometimes when we don't necessarily have a reporter who's like from a particular community or something, it's like they work very closely with a community organization or something that like they already have trust with, that can like introduce them to people that like is giving them feedback sort of like throughout the process. And even like, you know, kind of sharing the mic in that way. I think that, you know, the like base of it is that, you know, building trust before you have an agenda of something. So talking to people and listening and asking questions that have nothing to do with your story and nothing to do with like what you need, because journalism is so extractive in so many ways. So, you know, it's a slower process, but kind of building relationships, you know, like often finding the most vocal person in the community to be like, all right, here, let's, you know, start talking about what you need. And then like they can slowly introduce you to other people who might be open and trust them so they can trust you. Like it's sort of a longer process. Like with, for instance, with that like Catherine Flowers situation, you know, she was very vocal and she was the one that introduced me to a lot of other people so that I could tell that story. But it's interesting because now the position I'm in, I'm like, I don't know if I would do that anymore. Like, I kind of feel like there's more impact in what we're doing now, which is training people and finding people to do it themselves rather than training people that are like, or hiring people that like already know how to do it or just have a story idea in their head. And so, but I definitely think that the relationship and the kind of constant communication outside of like the story is the most important part. That's a good question.
Awesome. And I just want to say before going to Amanda and then Meghna is that Lyndsey, you kind of outlined the larger goal for this project. Like as a starting point, we are working with students. We're trying to get them to this point where they feel comfortable like making these connections with perhaps the more vocal people and building that trust, or just documenting their own communities, being the person that you're talking about hiring who represents the community you're trying to go to, but doing it themselves, you know what I mean? And then eventually getting to a point where we're not sending students into community at all. We are training communities to do their own oral history collection. So anyway, I just like that aligned so beautifully. I was just like, dang, we're
really cool. Yeah.
So Amanda, then Meghna, and then Angela.
Hi. I have 2, but I'll just do one, and if there's time, come back to me. But I don't know if I missed this. I have a bit of a headache, so I might have trouble following. But if I'm trying to find a recipe for like what exactly the community journalism is doing differently. And so if you were just to summarize in like 1, 2, 3, like would it be, you know, the way that like the sources you're choosing or the questions that you're asking, or like how would you sort of just summarize what exactly is the formula for doing this right?
I have an example. Hold on. Can I share my screen, Cameron? Is that like
Yeah, let me make sure you have access. Okay, you should have access now, I think. Is it working?
Okay, I'll show you this and then I'll explain quickly just how I think about it. So this was written by a friend of mine who runs Canopy Atlanta, and Lee, and another friend that runs Lead New Orleans, that were in the Stanford Fellowship with me. Okay, can y'all see this? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this was made by Documented, which is a New York newsroom for immigrants. And I think this is like a very simple thing that you're probably like, okay, duh, like, what are you even showing me this for? But this, I think, sums up sort of like what community journalism is. So before, and just generally traditional journalism is like, we have an idea for a story and we give you the news, and then the audience takes that. And like, that's the end of that relationship. What we're talking about, like what we're trying to do and what we've learned from all these other organizations is, and honestly learned from community organizing, which is like what a lot of this is rooted in, is we have the news, right, that we're providing or trying to understand or whatever, giving it to the audience, getting feedback from the audience, right, the people you're serving, and then using that again to keep informing what you're doing. So instead of being a linear, like we are up here and we give you something down there, it's more of a circuit, like a feedback loop that's constant. And that's like, okay, if you give us more feedback, we know what we need next time. Or if you give us feedback that like, this wasn't useful to you, then we can kind of switch it up next time. So I always like think about this diagram, just because it seems very simple, but like, that's not how journalism has been done historically. And so, when I think about community journalism, there's like all these different like definitions of it, but it's journalism that is responsive to what people are asking for and need, that can change based on what people like that you're trying to serve are asking for, that's empathetic and thoughtful, and more often like really taking into account what kind of the subject matter, that you're talking about is difficult and traumatic often, and that like people need to be able to do that like on their own time and in their own way. Like we can't force that out of them, right? And it's also participatory. So the way that like I have kind of learned to think about it is that the best community-oriented journalism is literally involving the community in what you're doing. So directly hiring them to, or training them, or, like you can learn journalism. It's not a rocket science. Like writing is hard as heck. Don't get me wrong. It's incredibly hard, even if you're good at it and love it. But the tools of journalism, like I'm talking about interviewing, records, that sort of thing, like that can be taught. And so community journalism is like this participatory media is also like sometimes what a phrase that's thrown around, that like documenters in City Bureau in Chicago came up with. And that I think is, another kind of level of it where instead of just listening, you're actually like involving people. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that.
Yeah, no, that I think that's a little helpful in the diagram. Helps to at least think about it. Yeah.
And I have actually like 3, I have like 3 links that I will send you all, or I'll put in the chat here. Oh wait, they can't do hyperlinks. Hold on. I'll send these, but someone else can ask me a question. I'll just like link these while I'm.
So Meghna, we have you next.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll also try to keep mine short, but kind of going along with this idea of community engaged journalism, I was just wondering how you strike a balance between highlighting existing injustice, and like trying to give a voice to communities that are facing violence, implicitly or explicitly, and also like making sure that the narrative isn't victimizing, so you're still highlighting like community resilience and empowerment. I think that's something that I've struggled with in terms of like looking at positionality and how sometimes representing humanitarian issues can become like savior like. So
yeah, well, it's a good question, because I think that I mean, we're doing a lot of work in particular on disasters just because they keep happening. And we were like, how do we pivot to like better cover this? Not in a breaking news kind of way, but in a like long-term recovery kind of way, whatever that is. Like that doesn't really happen generally. But like, what does that look like and who's benefiting and who's not from the systems that we operate in? And that, and also, you know, like the pollution, public health stuff, like it's heavy and hard, and there's a lot of what you're talking about inherently in those things. And so I think that, you know, one way is to come at it from a framing of like, we know this is happening, and like, yes, we need kind of the experience and the story and like all this like juicy stuff that you like really want to know. But the reality is like by the time a journalist comes and does a story on a disaster, like 3 months after it happened, or finally writes about illnesses that community like members have when they've been dealing with it for decades, like they already have been working on that for decades, you know, years, decades, whatever it is. Like they have been doing the work every single day because they're living it. And I think always knowing that like, whether or not we're watching or interviewing or paying attention, like they were always doing it, like dealing with it and trying to come up with solutions and pressuring officials and trying to get studies done. And like, I think one way that like this really showed up for me was I wrote about the the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that eventually got canceled. But I did a lot of reporting up and down, like I traveled up and down the 600-mile route that it was supposed to take and talked to a lot of different types of people in rural areas, in Black communities, Indigenous communities, rural white communities. And the thing that struck me so much was that like these people had rooms of like documents that they were keeping track of because they knew exactly what was happening to them and like what was being proposed and how it could harm them. And they were just waiting for someone to come and be like, so what's up? Like, what do you want to talk about? And I think that a lot of people, you know, like just that, again, that's just an example of like having that framing of like, people know what's going on and what's wrong. They might not have the language for it. They might not have the research to back it up. They might not, like with climate change, know exactly how to talk about it because it's so politicized, but kind of recognizing that they're trying their best in whatever way that looks like to address it. And kind of creating just as much space for people to share that stuff or however much they need to share or want to share. And I think that comes from like building the trust that we were talking about earlier, where before, you know, you're asking like, okay, tell me every detail, like gory detail about what's happening. It's making sure that you have a relationship first. And also telling stories about solutions. And I don't mean it like in like silver bullet kind of solutions, but more of like these grassroots things, like what is actually working? Like, how are you all taking care of each other? Who's been organizing for a really long time? What ideas do you actually have for like one of the most amazing questions, like I keep asking people is like, okay, what are your ideas for policies that would change like the housing crisis in this particular place? And like people will just like rattle stuff off, you know, like they've been thinking about this because they're living it. And so I think always asking people, not just like the bad stuff, but also like asking them like what ideas they have, like what's their vision for their community? What would they love to see? Like what's beautiful about where they live? Like those places where people really feel prideful in, because even if they hate what an industry is doing to a place, right? Or like the company that's been harming them, like people love where they live generally and want to talk about it. And so kind of like giving them points of pride while also trying to figure out like what's going on. If that makes sense. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I haven't always seen like more inspiring narratives that really highlight community work that has already been done. So I appreciate your response to my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
And if you could, I'm just curious, Lyndsey, you mentioned documenting just up and down the Atlantic Coast Pipeline pathway and speaking to a lot of different types of communities. Just curious how you went about like at the time, building that trust and navigating communities that may not have looked like you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that again, it sort of came from, I mean, that thing was a little easier because like everyone was actively trying to stop it. Like, and it was a very like publicized fight. So people were like chomping at the bit to talk about it, so you didn't have to try very hard to like pull things out of people because it was so urgent. But even so, I think, again, finding sort of allies and people you're comfortable with that are like leading that work, and then kind of being like, all right, I really appreciate that, like, you're the most vocal here, but how do we, like, who can I talk to that's like dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, or like whose land is actually about to be, because oftentimes with these community groups, like there's gatekeepers with whoever's representing them. Like I love the SELC, but like oftentimes I'll be like, I don't really care about what you think. I just need to talk to like the organizations that you're representing, or like somebody that, if it's possible. Or there's gatekeepers in communities where it's like, you'll have like a white activist that's like kind of trying to be the voice of an indigenous community, which I've run into a little bit like in Robeson County. And it's like, well, I get that you're kind of the loudmouth here, but like, I need to hear from the people that are actually dealing with this and would be most impacted by it. And so I think that kind of being honest about like, it's only like, what are my motives? Like, I just want to better understand what you're dealing with and going through, and portray that in a light that's not, couldn't be misinterpreted, right? Like I want to be the most truthful about this as possible and give, like, amplify your voice. Like, I often like stray from like giving people a voice because they have a voice, but like we can amplify it and we can like give them the tools that they need to actually like tell their story. But, like kind of giving them agency over their own story. And I think that idea, like people really resonate with that because they're like, yeah, I do want to talk for myself about what's going on. So yeah. And I think too, kind of just trying to connect the dots where possible. Like I talked to someone in Virginia that's going through something really similar as you are in North Carolina. Like you all should connect and talk about it because you're dealing with the same things, whether it's like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline thing. And like people were connecting or like knew each other or knew of each other, but hadn't talked. And so also like not just being a journalist or like a documenter in that way, but like actually trying to like build community around it. Here's that story.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I see Amanda's hand up, but I want to ask one quick question from somebody who couldn't be here today. I think it ties into exactly what you were saying. But from a platform standpoint, when you're talking about like Southerly as a platform for telling other people's stories, how have you gone about making sure that you're not centering your own perspective? And I know the strategy has changed over time, right? You've been working with different journalists, perhaps people in community, but as a platform, as the person curating in a way, the content on Southerly, how do you ensure that it's not dominated by your perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think I struggled for a really long time because I like when people said Southerly, like they meant me. Like I was like, my identity was so wrapped up in it because I was the only one doing it for a really long time. And like, people were talking to me on panels about it. And like, I was the one that started it. So obviously I'm going to talk about it. I had like a big Twitter presence. So everyone wanted to like hear my take on something that was happening. And I wrote the newsletter. So, and people like gravitated towards the newsletter because they liked the way I wrote about it. So I think a couple of ways and that's still really hard because it's still mostly me, but I think I've separated because of like the direction that we've taken. Like I've been able to separate like my identity as a journalist and as a human from like Southerly is something else. It's like something I created, but like it is much bigger than just me now. And I think that is just like general, like human learning things that I've gone through. And also again, like I got off Twitter, for instance, because I was like, this sucks. Like I hate everyone on here. So I quit Twitter and was like, okay, let me just like take myself out. Like, I don't feel like I need to be the person that's like sticking it to everybody all the time, like, and that's kind of how it felt. Like I needed to stand up for like this thing, and this cause. And sometimes I'm like, I think I've really learned in like listening and just like knowing when I can, like, I feel like these kinds of conversations are more impactful than just like yelling on the internet. Other way is like, Taja McQueen, who's our director of, outreach and engagement now. So she's been doing some social stuff and also just like helping lead our fellowship. She writes a newsletter a few times a month now. So like someone else's voice is in the newsletter. She writes some more, like we have more people writing posts, and like I rarely write anymore, which kind of sucks because I like writing, but also it's really nice to like not be the one that everyone's like, sometimes people come across Sutherland and they like don't know that it's just me, which is like, I think a huge win, because I don't necessarily want people to be like, oh, it's you, like you're a white lady, like writing about environmental justice. So I've worked really hard at like, I mean, it's never been hard for me to like step out of the spotlight, but like it was hard to like separate those two things. And I think finally we have like enough of a groove that that I'm able to be like, hey, someone else can take on this like conversation.
Awesome. Just sort of hearing that decentering of self almost from the work. I think that's something that hopefully connects with the students as they're thinking about doing their own oral histories. I want to turn it over to Amanda, and I want to be respectful of your time, Lyndsey, because I think I told you like 45 minutes.
Oh, it's fine. I can answer. I'm good.
Okay, you're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. So like you talk about like empowering the people who are facing these injustices, and that makes sense. But I also think like at the end of the day, there's a power limit. So like I think it's important that like politicians, or just like people with influence outside of the experience are engaged in the issue. So I'm just kind of curious like how they fit into what community journalism is doing. Like how do you pull their attention? Does it work just automatically? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like generally, we're still asking, like holding power to account in the sense of, we're still doing stories where it's like asking questions of city officials or county officials, and like making sure that we're getting their response. For instance, in like the stories that Cameron was doing, we were writing a lot about community work, but like asking like DEQ, like, what's up? Like, what are y'all doing? Like constantly, like that's journalism, right? Like, yes, it's community journalism. You can call it whatever, like, but like, there's no reason that like community focused journalism can't still be like, it still is ethical and holding power to account and trying to uncover injustice. And, it's just changing a little bit of like who's doing it and who it's for. And making it more accessible to break into an industry that has historically been very white and very affluent. So that's really what it's about. And two, I think the other thing is like, the people who have the most access to those officials are often just like residents that we're training, because there are so few local news outlets, especially in the rural South. So like you don't have people watching city council meetings or going to like school board meetings or like all these things where you used to have journalists paying attention to it. And now it's kind of like, okay, how do we give people the tools that they need to ask the right questions at a city council meeting, or get the public records that they need. And then we can help figure out like what to do with it. And so I don't know what that looks like long-term. Like, I don't know what the answer is to that, but like one way sort of I'm thinking about this idea of like getting officials responses or like input or whatever it is we've been reporting in Southwest Louisiana for a couple of years since Hurricane Laura hit in 2020. And we eventually built up enough relationships where we now have a program. I've been talking about documenters. It's a program that was started in Chicago to pay people to go to public meetings and publish just notes on public meetings. Like, here's what happened at city council. Here's what happened at school board. Here's what happened at planning and zoning. So I pitched an idea of like, what if we did this in Southwest Louisiana, Lake Charles, which is kind of near the Texas border. What if we do that around all the hurricane money that they've gotten? So like, I know that this parish, the county is spending millions of dollars in federal money that they got from the hurricane a couple years ago, and no one knows where it's going and no one knows what's happening to it. And so we've been training people to go and publish meeting notes, and we've already been able to like get access to city officials and ask them questions that like, or like get like one city in that area, Westlake, a lot of industry and stuff is there, so it's very small, but they weren't even publishing city council notes on their city website all year. And we took notes and like took a video at the meeting. One of our documenters did. So they get paid hourly to do this. And then I was like, hey, can you try to see if like just do a public records request? And they gave her all the meeting notes that they just like weren't putting on the website. And so we put them on our Google Drive or whatever and made them accessible. But like, it's just sort of like opening up conversations so that people know like these people are supposed to be serving me. How can we like get their input and like build a better like whether or not it, it always doesn't have to be like confrontational, but like how do we open the communication channels in that way that like they've just been closed because it's either like a journalist is like coming in and like exposing something. Well, it doesn't have to be like that all the time. Like hopefully one day it's not like that all the time, but like can we just like make sure people know that like they're all in the same community and they can communicate or ask questions without being like doing some expose. So yeah, but I think that it's difficult because oftentimes those people don't want to talk. So it makes it harder, but it's still, they're still human beings in a place and they also know things about it. And most of the time they're dealing with like very few resources and like very a little money. And so just like recognizing that and that like their experience is also valid.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Angela has her hand raised, and then I think if nobody else has any questions, we will wrap up. I said this will be a short class and I lied. So, but this has been great. I hope that all of you have found this extremely helpful. There are a lot of parallels here between journalism as a storytelling method and oral history as a story. Like, there actually the only real difference is just that you are not sitting there writing something yourself. I think that's the distinction there. So I'm hoping that you guys are taking a lot from this conversation in terms of methodologies and thinking and reflecting. But Angela, go ahead.
Hi, Lyndsey. Really appreciate it. I think what you talked about, like how it's important to build like long-term trust with the community and just having some pre-interaction or first kind of community involvement without really having like an interview intention. I think this is very inspiring to me. But I'm just wondering, like, what if, let's say, I am a totally outsider to a community, and we might even come from like different cultural backgrounds, and I came into the community without really have any previous connection with them, and I kind of have like a limited amount of time to just work with them and do like the story collecting part. Then what might be some suggestions that I can start with, or just to like do my work better in terms of still getting their stories, but like building trust or like whatever that's important?
Yeah. I think that the best advice I could give is just like always being transparent, like just laying it out for like whatever it is, right? Like if you're doing it for school, if you're doing it for money, if you're doing it for whatever it is, just like when you go into a place, just being like, this is my background and this is my experience. Like, this is where I come from. And, telling a little bit about yourself so that you can find some commonalities. I think that always helps. Because even if you don't think you have something in common with them, like you probably do, like whatever that looks like, whether it's a hobby or something in your experience or family life or whatever. So, just being as like kind and thoughtful in that way as possible, obviously, but like the idea of just being like, this is why I'm here. And like, this is what I want to do with it. Like, this is my intention, and being very honest about your intentions and where it will be published, or like if it will ever be published, or like what it will be used for, like what it could help for in like this greater scope. And usually people are pretty receptive to that, like they just want to know, like, they're not going to be ghosted by some like Washington Post reporter that's like coming in for like 30 minutes. Right. And that's the same for like anything. Like, you might not know where it'll go, but you can just say like, I want to keep in touch about this. So like, I'm going to take, I want to interview you, talk to you about this, like, give me your contact information and like follow up with them. And just, if it takes a year to show up on your website or whatever, or 6 months or however long it takes, follow up with them periodically and be like, hey, I didn't forget about you. Like, hope you're doing well, that sort of thing. And so just making it clear that like, you're not just going to like extract some story and then run. And like, again, that's a more time consuming and harder, but I think if you can like be more upfront about that, it'll help you create a better relationship in the long run.
Yeah, that helped. Thank you.
Great questions, y'all. I hope it was helpful. Cameron, like, feel free to give out my email. If you have questions, like, let me know. I don't know if I could ever be helpful, but this is a really cool project. So feel free to like ask me anything.
Lyndsey, you're always helpful. And I am going to give y'all her email address. Please feel free to follow up if you have additional questions, either about the work that she's doing. I know several of you are interested in journalism outside of this also. And so that might be an additional point of connection. It's unfortunate that Lyndsey is no longer in Durham and you can't just like go visit her. But thank you so much for joining us, for sort of explaining your process and providing these insights.
Yeah, I'm glad I could be helpful. And thanks for y'all's work and doing this. It's not easy. So I just appreciate being in the good fight with y'all.
We'll keep you updated on, I'll keep you updated on this. There's a lot of components to the project. And one of which actually involves a mall. So I know like drawing on everything. So
I know, I love it.
I'm gonna keep you updated, Lyndsey.
Okay.
Everyone else, stick around. We're gonna do some housekeeping things. And thanks again for your time, for going over with us on time.
Oh gosh, it was great. I love talking to you. Yeah, okay, have a good weekend and thanks, Cameron.
Yeah. Good to see you again, always. Awesome, guys. So any impressions, any key takeaways? I would love to, I know that was a very journalism heavy conversation, but I do want to reiterate just how connective journalism is to oral history work and other forms of storytelling. Like, hopefully some of the draws from her experience, from the work that she's doing in community, the strategies that she's used, the way that she thinks about herself in connection to her work, were helpful. But like 2 minutes, does anyone have any key takeaways they'd be willing to share? Any highlights, any feedback? Victoria.
I was like taking notes of whatever she said that really, really stood out to me. And one of the things that I wrote down was building trust before you have an agenda, which I think is really important, especially as we are, starting to create our plans for entering these communities, is knowing that like what we're doing in there is more than an agenda. It's like these people's lives.
That's an excellent point. And I'll just note, I think it's a tad easier from an oral history perspective to go in without an agenda. All you guys really need to know is that you're hoping to talk about them and potentially environmental justice related things. And if they don't go into that, then it doesn't matter. Unlike with an article, you're sitting there like, I need to cover this disaster and so I think that's a really good takeaway. Anybody else? Any other? No, Angela.
Yeah, I think that actually reminds me a lot of the conversation that I had with my group member last time, because we talked about if like offline and online communication are gonna make a difference. And I think to that point, I think it will be yes. And that actually reminds me like there are actually a lot of work that can be done before we really start with the like real interview process. And I think like a lot of her suggestions really reminds me a lot about the fieldwork methods that cultural anthropologists are having before like entering into the field. Like they would have all kinds of awareness in terms of how they're going to build their connection with the community and stuff. And I'm just wondering like if like community journalism can actually be connected with like cultural anthropology at some point.
Oh, I most definitely. I think especially when you're doing any sort of community-based storytelling work, it usually connects back in an academic sense to like cultural anthropology work. I don't know that Lyndsey did much of that. Like, she has a pure journalism background, but I know that I think we all end up coming to the same principles at the end, right? this idea of trust building, of being in community, of building rapport before you actually sit down with a person. And I think also that just like get to know them a little bit and share a bit about yourself and find those points of commonality. So excellent feedback, excellent notes. Anybody else before we get into like the last 15 minutes of just housekeeping stuff? Can I get like a show of hands of who thought that was helpful? In all honesty, everyone with their camera on. Okay, I'm glad all of you guys found that to be beneficial. Again, the purpose really here was last week we were really centering on points of connection, resonance, commonality, and I think Lyndsey helped reiterate the point of when you're having these conversations, it's really just about building relationships. And all of you guys know how to build relationships. If you have any sort of relationship, you know how to interact with people. So let's make sure we treat people like people. And I guess the last thing I want to make sure I call out, I loved your question. I think it was Meghna about this idea of like victimization versus positivity. And hopefully that came through also as you guys are thinking about how to talk to people, that you're not just like, what's the deal with this landfill over here? Or how is this? You're asking them about their day, about their lives, about their families, about their ancestry. I mean, these are really cool ways to get people to talk about issues in a way that is positive and built in resilience and family connections. So that's something to think about when you start actually developing out your interview guides and such. Anyways, if there are no other points, questions, feedback, I'm so glad that was beneficial. Let me do a quick housekeeping bit. So no class next week. So you guys are like off for 2 weeks. So we want to make sure that you are in a good space so that when you come back, we can really launch off. The first tidbit is that when you come back, your draft mid-semester outlines are due. A reiteration of what this is, and then I'll take some questions if anyone is confused about it. It's a short paper. Again, we don't care about grammar. I don't even really care about length. There's an arbitrary length in there. Take as much space or as little space as you need to do the work. But the purpose is to start putting into words what you guys might be thinking for your larger oral histories. So, and I'm sure you got a better sense perhaps from this conversation today about if it makes sense to go into a community that you live in or that you're familiar with versus the strategy for going into a community that you're not familiar with. Lyndsey sort of presented 2 ideas there. I think we've been saying that over the course of the last few months. So it's up to you to determine which of those are you going to do and what is your strategy for doing that, for identifying community organizations, or if you already know people, listing out who you're going to talk to and what your relationship is to them and how you want to go about approaching them. We're not asking you to outline what your questions would be or anything. That is what the interview guide is for in a few weeks. And I'll explain in greater detail what exactly that is. Again, we don't want y'all going in with agendas, so we're not expecting you to go in with like a list of questions before you start talking to people, but it's start to get you thinking about how to formulate questions. They'll be generic. It'll just be sort of like a brainstorm of how I should go about talking to people and how I should be framing my conversations with them, more so than here is exactly what I'm going to be talking to people about sort of thing, if that makes sense. But on the mid-semester outline, we're just looking for something that shows that you have been thinking about what you're hoping to do in the long term of this project. What community, what issue, some research. Part of the work I think that aligns with journalism here is that you need to be looking into the community and the issue and any history you can find, any articles you can find, anything that shows that you've been thinking about it and you are aware of what's happening there before you actually go into those communities. And then identifying organizations to connect with or people to connect with if you already know people, and just general strategy. Does that make sense? The purpose of this document? Any questions? Awesome. And the hope at this point, unlike the summer assignment, is that this is the project you would want to work on long term. So you're not going to be changing it as much. Obviously, there's room for flexibility. This is a draft. Your final's not due until I forget when on the syllabus, later in the semester. So there is time for flexibility, but this is your opportunity to share with us what you're thinking so we can provide you feedback. We can have conversations with you about how to get started on those things. So thumbs up. Can I get a thumbs up on all of that? Cool beans? Everyone's good? Okay. So that's due on October 14th when we come back from fall break. Amina, your fall break is the week after ours, isn't it?
Yes, unfortunately.
You don't have to come to class. Just we can have a conversation. Just if anyone has any extenuating circumstances about literally anything, I know we're working on different timetables for some of us, so just let me know. We can work that out. I just blanked on that. But when we come back, the plan is to really start diving into the more formal oral history stuff. So the last two classes focused on the sort of storytelling and the reflection and the rethinking. When you come back, we're going to hear from Duke Libraries about informed consent, what the process looks like, the forms that you guys are going to have people fill out, how that works, how it gets housed in Duke Libraries, all of that, just to give you some insights into the process. And then we're going to hear from Kay Jowers about some more of like, how do you actually go into community and build trust over time? She's a Duke professor, EJ advocate, EJ scholar, freaking amazing. She has really, in my mind at least, perfected the way of thinking about community engagement and intentional research, not oral history, but research in North Carolina specifically. So that's the plan when y'all get back, along with your mid-semester outlines. Any questions about the direction the class is taking from here? Cool. No, I know the period of like sort of reflection and positionality and storytelling was a bit short. So if people feel like they want more time to do that thinking and that reflecting in a class setting, let me know. You guys are free to be thinking about how you want to engage with communities and how your own experiences might form connections or points of resonance with others. You're free to do that anytime you want. Obviously, we're hoping that you're thinking about that outside of class. But if people feel like we didn't spend enough time on this, let me know, please, so that we can make sure that we dedicate some additional time in subsequent classes for y'all to work this out. Okay? Does that sound okay? The last thing is just figuring out who's going to be doing what. So I know y'all are thinking about your long-term projects, but we have set up some structure so that you can document oral histories in Piney Woods, that you can work with William Barber III. A couple of you have reached out interested in connecting with oral histories of the Hallowassa tribe. I've already connected you with Donna Chavis on that. So I would like to get a show of hands of who would like to do what. The first bit is William Barber III has connected us with he's going to connect with several environmental justice advocates. These are seasoned advocates in North Carolina to conduct oral histories with the larger goal of, and this is sort of that agenda setting we're not supposed to be doing, but these are like things we want to make sure come out of these oral histories because he would like to do something with them. The first is, how did they get into the work that they're doing? And the second is, what are some of the key distinctions between climate justice and environmental justice? Those are the two bits he would like to come out of those interviews. These are people who have more interviewing experience, like with media and stuff. So there'll be, I guess, a different type of oral history. That's number one. Number two is the Piney Woods community stuff. So speaking to members of the Piney Woods community. You are free to do both, or you can do one or the other. So can I get a show of hands who is interested in the EJ advocates piece? And I'm just doing numbers right now. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's like a lot of people. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Am I just seeing like everybody except for Tasha, Ryan, and Danny? Okay, that's good to know. Who is interested? And again, you can do both in the Piney Woods oral history collection. Rick. 1, 2, 3. It's about the same numbers. All right. You know what? I'm gonna do this again more systematically. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. I'm gonna take names. Can we start with the first one really quickly? Who is interested in the EJ advocates? Hands, please. Okay. Madeline, Megan, Victoria, Magna, Christina, Amina, Amanda. Is that everybody? Okay. And who is interested in the Piney Woods? Angela, Madeline, Victoria, Magna, oh my gosh, Amanda, and Sophia. All right. And those who did not raise their hands, Tasha, I already know that you're on the Hollow as the Pony one. You just want to do that one?
Yes. Sorry, I'm gonna be honest. I checked out for a second. In regards to like if we should choose more than one, or is if one is just like cool.
You can just do one. Like
Okay.
I think the assumption is that if you are doing that, you might do maybe like 2 out of the Hollow as the Pony tribe. But it's up to you how many you want to do. I'm just giving you the opportunity to do as many as y'all feel comfortable, honestly.
Wait, sorry, go ahead. Let me to jump in.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. Wait, sorry. I think I might have lost track. What's the Piney Woods thing?
The Piney Woods one is what is the whole like harvest festival bit. Everybody gets to go to the harvest festival, but people will connect with community members. He has a
Okay.
short list of people in Piney Woods who have been there for generations or that are members of his family that he would like to document the oral histories of.
And the tribe is what? It's called what again?
Oh, the Hollow was the Pony tribe bit is sort of one at EJ Advocate expressed an interest in some of our students collecting oral histories of the PCB issue, the PCB pollution issue in the Hollow as the Pony Nation, specifically in North Carolina. So I mentioned after last class, if you were interested in that, email me. I have already connected people to Donna on that one. If you are interested in that, Amanda, just let me know.
Do you have enough for that? Like where I could do that over the Piney Woods one? Or do you need more people on Piney?
We need more people on Piney Woods, if I'm being honest.
Okay. All right. That's whatever then. Cool.
Awesome. And then I think I didn't see Ryan. Did your hand go up? Are you just thinking you want to focus on the work that you're doing?
If that's all right.
That's fine.
Okay.
That is fine. Yeah, the purpose of this sort of fall semester stuff is to give y'all experience before you're launching in your own things. So you're fine to continue on that, Ryan. And then Danny, I don't have your name on anything. Is Danny there? I can follow up with them after.
There's been no sound, but
yeah.
Aren't they like overseeing this though, more than anything? I didn't know if they were.
No, Danny's still participating, but they're also like doing survey things and things, checking with you guys. So anyway, doesn't matter. Cool beans, guys. So I just want to recap. I have Madeline, Megan, Victoria, Megna. Why did it change it to Megan? It's Megna. Christina, Amina, and Amanda on the EJ Advocates one. I have Angela, Madeline, Victoria, Megna. Oh my God. Megna, Amanda, and Sophia on the Piney Woods one. Am I missing anybody?
Hi, Cameron.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I heard my name in the previous group. I'm kind of interested in doing games like currently, so it would be nice if you can put my name into the first group as well.
All right. I did not have your name in the first group, so.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So there seems to be a really big emphasis on the EJ stuff. What's likely to happen is each person will get one of those because there's only so many EJ advocates he listed out. And then I have 6 people interested in the Piney Wood stuff. Again, everybody can still go. And that'll just be a bit of those 6 people can really hone in on talking to his short list of people. So you might get to do a few extras, maybe like 2 from Piney Woods. That sounds okay. All right, we have 1 minute. I just wanted to get that down. I will be following up with William Barber III to connect all those interested on the EJ Advocate side to the EJ Advocates. That can start ASAP. The Piney Woods stuff will start actually at the Harvest Festival. So I'll have a date for you guys on that on Tuesday, hopefully. And we'll orchestrate taking y'all down there. We're hoping to do some really formal like video equipment type stuff. So we're actually have people sit down at the Harvest Festival and tell their stories as they participate in the festivities. And then we will connect you for ongoing conversations with those same people over the course of the next few months. So that'll be a fun thing to do. Any other bits before we head off?
If you need more hands on Piney Woods, I can do both as well.
Do you want to do both, Christina?
Sure.
Okay, we're not forcing people to do anything here. So, okay, I have you down for that one as well. So I'll keep you guys updated on connecting the dots on all of these things. I'll also make sure that you get Lyndsey's contact information if you have any more questions for her. And just remember, when we get back, your mid-semester outlines are due, and I'm hoping next week to start connecting you guys to EJ Advocates and to William Barber III. So, all right, my dudes, thank you for showing up today. Sorry for the promise of a short class just to go 1 minute over. So enjoy your weekends in the rain.
Thanks, Cameron.
You.